What is its nature? What does he do, this man you see? What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve by killing?
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So what do you think is the critical clue, the singular clue that gave KOHBERGER away? Right now, write it down in the comments, the thing that you think is the most important, the most critical clue. So we have now received the 19-page probable cause affidavit, and in this episode we're going to deal with 10 highlights, basically just summarizing the most important takeouts from there, as well as some interesting and to some extent troubling mysteries. And we're also going to draw a conclusion from the affidavit. But we are going to start off by highlighting the number one critical clue that gave KOHBERGER away. And it's quite amazing how that clue was discovered, where it was discovered, when it was discovered, and the clue itself. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you have, welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most Van Gogh voice in true crime, basically one of the most misunderstood voices. A lot of people don't really understand where I'm coming from, but those who know this channel know that we try to be genuine here. We do try to build a case anchored in evidence, and that is why the probable cause affidavit is so important to that end. By the way, it's also just emerged that the FBI didn't actually order those dual stops, as was reported in Fox News, so yet another fake news story. If you're enjoying this episode, this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So it's right there on day one at about 4 p.m. That is 4 p.m. on November the 13th, that's Sunday. Barely 12 hours after the crime was actually committed, that the cops made their breakthrough. That's how long it took, less than half a day. Midway through page 2 of the affidavit, Corporal Brett Payne notices a tan sheath of a K-bar knife lying right beside, literally on the right-hand side of Maddie on the bed. And this is an excerpt from the affidavit. He writes, "As I entered the bedroom, I could see two females in the single bed in the room. Both Gonsalves and Mogan were deceased with visible stab wounds. I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogan's right side. The sheath was later processed and had a K-bar USMC and the United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and Anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA left on the button snap of the knife sheath." And so that is pretty incredible. That is one area, maybe of several, where they actually found KOHBERGER's DNA. How do you think that happened? Well, when dressing for the kill, the suspect did everything right. According to a witness, he was dressed all in black. He wore a face mask. He apparently wore gloves and dark Vans shoes. The trouble was, after sheathing his Rambo knife in the sheath, the killer clipped the knife in place with his naked, ungloved finger pressing on that polished, round surface of the snap, and thus deposited his DNA. That's unless this was a blood droplet. This would be a similar boo-boo to turning off his phone at the scene, but then turning it on when he wasn't quite home yet, on the drive home early Sunday morning. In other words, he's sort of on the right track in trying to cover his tracks, but he doesn't quite get it right. So apparently in the execution of this crime, it looks like one of the victims must have pulled, in the struggle, the victim must have pulled this sheath from his belt during the tussle. Number two, KOHBERGER's DNA was matched by confirming it or matching it to his father's DNA. This is where the genealogical DNA narrative comes into play. It was never a sample volunteered for family history or family ancestry. I actually always thought that was quite unlikely. It was collecting the trash from his parents' home and getting a usable sample of his father from Michael KOHBERGER and getting his DNA. And can you believe it? This happened just 3 days prior to KOHBERGER's capture and arrest. So if we go to the affidavit, it says, quote, on December 27, Pennsylvania agents recovered the trash from the KOHBERGER family residence. That evidence was sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing. The next day, December 28, the Idaho State Lab reported that a DNA profile obtained from the trash and the DNA profile obtained from the sheath identified a male as not being excluded as the biological father of suspect profile. In other words, they couldn't exclude the DNA sample of the father as KOHBERGER's father. At least 99.9998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. In other words, they're basically saying it matched. Number 3, Murphy did his duty. Officers found the dog in Kaylee's room on the top floor. The first time that something was awry was when Dee, one of the survivors, heard a sound. And the sound, she said, sounded like Kaylee playing with Murphy, sounded like someone was playing with a dog in the upstairs bedroom, and I guess Kaylee's bedroom. There were likely scuffling sounds and muted noises, perhaps caused because the dog intuited that something was happening, because of what it heard, felt, and smelled. And so perhaps the dog was jumping around and making sort of muffled noises because it was concerned, and it was right to be concerned. According to the affidavit, Dee stated she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the southeast side of the second floor. That's the same floor that Xana and Ethan were found on, and it's beside the kitchen. Dee stated she was woken at about 4 a.m. by what sounded like Kaylee playing with Murphy in one of the upstairs bedrooms, and that's located on the floor above. A short time later, Dee said she thought what sounded like Kaylee say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." She actually heard those words. Now, had the dog been allowed to sleep with the girls in the same room, bear in mind it's quite a cold night, he may actually have saved everyone's lives. He may have barked. He may have scared off the perpetrator. Number 4, incredibly, the killer dodged a DoorDash delivery by about 15 minutes before the murders. So what we've discovered through the probable cause affidavit is that the crime happened later than we thought it did. We thought it was in a window between 3 and 4 a.m., and it turns out it was after 4 a.m. At 4 a.m., there was an unexpected visitor to 1122 King Road. A DoorDash order arrived for Xana and Ethan. And 15 minutes later, Xana was on her phone using TikTok. So we know the victims were at least alive by as late as 4:15 a.m., which is pretty late. And so you can imagine the killer was really patiently waiting for these people to go to sleep, and they were still awake till really late in the morning. And so this actually means that the killer likely entered the house while Xana was still awake. If she received a food order and then she was on her phone 15 minutes later, and the crime was likely happened at 17 minutes past 4, well, it really seems as though, unlike has been reported in the media, not everyone was killed while they were sleeping in their beds. According to the affidavit, Kaylee said something to the effect of, "There's someone here." A review of records obtained from a forensic download of Kernodle's phone showed this could also have come from Kernodle. She may have said, "There's someone here," because her cellular phone indicated she was likely awake at 4:12 a.m. Number 5, CCTV from 1112 King Road, less than 50 feet away, recorded audio of the incident while it happened. Now, if you drive down the road, so if you come out of the front door and you drive down the road, 1112 King Road is the very last road. It's on the corner. And it is, I think, a kind of a greenhouse when you look at it on Google Street View. So Murphy was still doing his duty, barking and perhaps rattling the killer. Did the killer know there was a dog in the house? Now, if you imagine that the killer had never attended a party, and it appears that he didn't, and just simply drove around the house occasionally, would he have known that there was a dog in the house? Would he have noticed that? So according to the affidavit, at about 4:17 a.m., a security camera located at 1112 King Road, a residence immediately to the northwest of 1122 King Road, picked up distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper followed by a loud thud. A dog can also be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. And so when this crime is committed, the dog starts barking. That could also be a reason why the crime was not completed and why perhaps the killer lost his nerve. But that is giving us a very accurate likely time of death, 4:17. Who would have imagined that there was a security camera less than 50 feet from the west wall of Kernodle's bedroom? Now let's go on to the sixth insight. D, one of the two survivors, heard Kaylee, heard Murphy, heard crying, possibly also heard Ethan, and actually clearly saw the killer walking towards her, so clearly that she even noted his bushy eyebrows. According to the affidavit, D said that she opened her door for the third time after she heard the crying, and she saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. D described the figure as 5'10" or taller, and we know KOHBERGER is 6 foot. Male, not very muscular, but athletically built, with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past D as she stood in a frozen shock phase. The male walked towards the backsliding glass door. D locked herself in her own bedroom. Number 7. Nowhere in the affidavit does it note the time 911 was called. Even though one of the survivors seemed to hear much of what happened, and when it happened at 4:17, more than 7.5 hours would pass. 7.5 long hours would pass before someone, not even her, called 911, and we know that call has still not been released. Now we go on to number 8. As speculated numerous times on this channel, part of the vital evidence left at the scene would be and was a bloody shoe print. According to the affidavit, during the processing of the crime scene, investigators found a latent shoe print. This was located during the second processing of the crime scene by the ISP forensic team by first using a presumptive blood test and then amino black, a protein stain that detects the presence of cellular material. In other words, although this shoe print was left in blood, it was actually not visible to the naked eye. Exactly what I said when I used the intertextuality of the Amanda Knox case. Absolutely exactly the same thing. The detective shoe print showed a diamond-shaped pattern, similar to the pattern of a Vans-type shoe sole, just outside the door of Dee's bedroom, located on the second floor. And what that seems to indicate is that she may have had a close call. She may have been one of the first victims to narrowly escape something happening to her. That brings us to number 9. KOHBERGER allegedly stalked his victims during 12 separate visits, including late on Sunday night, August 21st, and that was the topic of my previous video. To quote from the affidavit, on December 23rd, 2022, pursuant to that search warrant, I received historical records for the 8458 phone from AT&T. That is the phone belonging to KOHBERGER. From the time the account was opened in June 2022, after consulting with Cast SA, I was able to determine estimated locations for the 8458 phone from June 2022 to present, the time period authorized by the court. The records for the 8458 phone show that the 8458 phone utilized cellular resources that provide coverage to the area of 1122 King Road on at least 12 occasions prior to November 13. All of these occasions, except for one, occurred in the late evening and early morning hours of their respective days. And so it seems like Brian was driving around the area of this house late at night, that he didn't attend parties, but he was nevertheless snooping around there. He was nevertheless cruising around there alone, driving alone at night, and I guess, drawing his plans, deciding what he was going to do. And ultimately, I don't know if he did very well in paying attention to the house. Did he really know who was inside? Did he really know that there was a dog inside? Did he expect to encounter a young man inside on November 13th? And that brings us to the final point, number 10. The killer made 3 drive-bys between 3:29 a.m. and 4:20 a.m., 3 separate drive-bys, before stopping to commit the crime on the 4th Circuit. So they actually captured this Elantra passing by the residence once, twice, 3 times, making 3-point turns, making U-turns, and the Elantra left 112 King Road when it finally did, at a high rate of speed, suggesting the killer botched the crime and had to leave in a hurry. I'm not going to go through all of the details here, just that basically confirms that CCTV cameras caught this vehicle, visiting the crime scene 4 times on the morning of the crime, and then it actually returned to the crime scene after that as well. Brian's phone was turned off from 2:47 a.m. to 4:50 a.m. that morning. But unlucky for Brian, when he turned the phone on, he was actually still in the vehicle. And this then could be synchronized with him driving the final streets to get to his apartment. And those final moments were actually tracked on CCTV. And in that way, they were able to sync his movements in the vehicle to the movements of the phone. So those are the highlights from the affidavit, and that brings up a very uncomfortable and kind of disconcerting issue, because mystery surrounds the strange behavior of the survivors. Did Dee really hear a male voice saying he was going to help in Xana's room? And if so, why didn't she attempt to communicate with anyone then, when we know that she heard distress, let alone... So why not attempt to communicate with someone then, at the time that she's hearing this distress? She hears crying, she hears a dog barking, she hears concerned voices saying someone's in the house, and also crying, and something about, I'm going to help you. Why not try to communicate with someone then? I mean, she got up 3 times and she saw a stranger in the house. Why not communicate with anyone else in the house? Why not do that then? And why wait until even more than 7 hours later? Do you believe that she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you"? Because if you think about that, it's kind of like saying, well, someone else said, "It's okay, I'm going to help somebody else so you don't have to." Do you think she really heard those words? Do you think if Ethan had been stabbed, that he may have said in a kind of a normal tone of voice, "It's okay," in a reassuring tone of voice, "It's okay, I'm going to help you"? And it sounds like if she heard that, wouldn't the killer have heard it as well? Anyway, how did the intruder enter? These are some of the questions we still haven't answered. How did he enter the house? Right? Did he enter through the sliding door? Was the sliding door unlocked? Did he really simply walk past Dee, as she said, but then skid away in haste once outside? Like those skid marks were actually left by the Elantra, apparently. If he didn't walk, did Dee say he did to account for her not doing anything during an obvious emergency? In other words, if the killer ran out the house, wouldn't she have realized something serious was going on and made inquiries and sort of looked around and realized he wasn't there anymore? Wouldn't there be the sound of him running out the house as well? What, if anything, is she hiding? I want to conclude this episode by doing 2 things. One is reminding you of a poll we did, and I want you to be honest and say what your answer was before and if your answer has changed. And the other one is going back to what Hannibal Lecter said about the nature of the crime.
What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve by killing?
Are you able to answer that question now, having read the affidavit? What needs are being served here by killing? And I think part of the way to address that is to realize what this killer is not. is not a serial killer. TCRS polled YouTube and Twitter on the question whether Brian is a serial killer. Prior to the affidavit coming out, 59% on YouTube and 63% on Twitter said they thought he is a serial killer. During the live stream I did earlier today, once we'd gone through the affidavit and with the benefit of the facts from the affidavit, those numbers inverted to 70% saying he isn't a serial killer and 30% saying he is. What do you say? Do you remember me quoting statistics very early on saying serial killings are rare, but the true crime community, including experts and folks in the FBI, have been watching, I think, too many serial killer documentaries. And so it seems like serial killers are all over the place. Statistically, they are very rare, and that has been borne out once again in this case. And so in the comments, I want you to try to think about that question. What needs does he serve by killing? What do you think the answer is? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.